Hey everyone, just a quick snapshot video on cost curves. In this video, we're going to focus on total costs, which will include the breakdown of total cost, and we will also look at the average costs as well. So let's start with quite basic formula, and that formula is knowing what total costs actually are. So total costs to a business will include the fixed cost plus the variable cost. So essentially, these are the costs that we have to consider. Now, in terms of drawing them, we have to be able to define them first. So a fixed cost is essentially a cost that a business has to pay when it sets up. It's a large cost. It's a cost that does not change over time. It's a fixed cost. And therefore, when looking at the diagram where you can see cost against output, cost on the y, output on the x, if we're looking at total fixed cost, essentially the graph that you're going to get is a perfectly elastic line, and we label that as total fixed cost. And again, what we're saying at this point is that this business has incurred an initial cost of setting up a business, whether it is paying for the factory, paying for a piece of land, paying for large amounts of capital, and that cost is quite a big cost, and it doesn't change over time. Okay, so that's what a total fixed cost is, and that's what it looks like. Then we have our total variable cost. Now, variable costs, okay, are costs that do change as output changes. So costs change as output changes. So again, the fixed cost, it doesn't change with output, but variable costs do change with output. So, common sense would say that as you start to increase your output and you start to, if you're a restaurant owner, a pizza restaurant owner, and you want to make more pizzas, well, as you start to increase the quantity of those pizzas, you're going to be using the ovens more, you're going to hire more labor, you're going to be using more electricity, more gas, and therefore your variable costs of operating that business is going to also change or increase. So variable costs, essentially, for the simplicity of it, we're going to say that essentially it's upward sloping just like that, and that's your total variable costs. And finally, we want to draw our fixed cost diagram, finally, we want to draw our total cost diagram. Now, clearly, we've already said that total costs are fixed costs plus variable costs. So that would mean then, therefore, that we are adding for each unit. So if we look at unit, let's say unit 2 over here, if the total variable cost is this position, okay, so the cost is over here, and the total fixed cost, as we know, doesn't change, so the cost is over here, so we'll call that C1 and C. Then by adding those two variables, those two values up at unit 2, we're going to get the total cost. Okay. Now, if you do that across all of the units, what you'll notice is that essentially the total cost is going to be parallel to the total variable cost, but it's going to start from where the fixed costs are. Because at 0 units, you're still paying a cost, which is the fixed cost. So this is the total cost curve. Okay, that's it. So there you have your total fixed cost, total variable cost, and total cost curves. And the distance between the total cost curve and the total variable cost curve, this consistent distance, because it is parallel, well, what is that? That is just the value of the fixed cost, isn't it? Okay, so now we want to try to establish what happens when you look at the average costs. So as you know, averages have to be considered in economics, and in order to work out the average total cost, all you will do is take the initial total cost and divide it by the output, as you would with normal average calculation. So again, we're looking at the average cost diagrams now, and so you can see here I've got a cost against output y-axis scenario. And before we begin, we just need to know what average costs are. And average costs are the total cost, which we looked at previously, divided by the output. We could take that a step further by saying that total cost we already know are total fixed cost plus total variable cost, and therefore the average cost can be broken down into total fixed cost plus total variable cost over the output. Now, if we go ahead and look at the average fixed cost, well, we know what the total fixed costs are already. So all you would do again is divide that by output, and the same thing for the average variable cost. You take the variable cost and divide it by output again. So these average figures now mean that the diagrams may look slightly different. If we start to look at the average fixed costs, you'll notice that this time, over a number of output, the average fixed cost is being reduced. Now, we did say before that total fixed costs don't change with output, and that's correct, they don't change, they stay the same. But hopefully you can see here that as a business sells more, it can spread its fixed costs over that number of output. And that's why it's downward sloping. It starts off high, it goes down. Similarly, with average variable costs, we can see that variable costs do increase as the business starts to operate more. And you notice that the average variable cost starts to fall initially, but then starts to rise again. Now, when you put the two together, you derive the average total cost of production, which is just a U-shaped curve, which is a culmination of the average fixed cost and the average variable cost. And our short-run average total cost curve will always be a U-shaped curve. I hope that helps distinguish between total costs and average costs and how the diagrams look.